The dining room glowed with the kind of extravagance that carried a price tag. A table draped in silk held bottles of wine older than most of the guests, each costing $10,000. Above us, a chandelier worth more than a suburban home scattered light like broken glass across polished silverware. Around me sat 20 executives with their jeweled spouses, each wearing watches and necklaces that could buy entire neighborhoods. To them, this evening was routine, a $50,000 display of power wrapped up as dinner. I tried to steady my hand as I lifted a crystal flute, the champagne untouched. My heart already raced when Victor, my boyfriend's father, leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut. He called me a charity case, a girl in borrowed clothes pretending to belong in his world. Laughter did not follow, but silence fell heavier than stone. His words reached every corner of the room, each syllable echoing against the marble walls. In that instant, every gaze landed on me as if my presence had suddenly become an intrusion. The chandelier sparkled above, and the table shimmered, but all I could see was the widening gap between who I was and what they thought I was. My $15,000 sedan, parked outside, once a quiet symbol of independence, now seemed like a joke compared to the fleet of imported cars waiting in their garages. I felt small, pressed between wealth and disdain, yet something within me refused to bend. Beneath the humiliation, a sharper feeling stirred, steady and unshakable. How could one insult, spoken so casually in a room dripping with excess, unravel everything? How could it become the spark that would topple a $3 billion empire? I was not born into the kind of wealth that draped itself across that dinner table. My earliest memories were of cracked walls in a public housing project where the elevators rarely worked and the heat failed in the winter. At 8 years old, after losing both parents, I entered foster care, moving from one unfamiliar home to another, learning quickly that survival meant adapting. By the time I was 16, I understood that if I wanted stability, I would have to build it myself. During college, I juggled 3 jobs, stocking shelves overnight, serving coffee in the mornings, and tutoring in the evenings, just to afford tuition and books. Scholarships filled the gaps, but even with aid, I lived on less than most people spent on a single designer handbag. Statistics say 38 million Americans live in poverty today, but for me, it was not a number. It was a daily reality. Food stamps were not an abstract policy. They had dinner on the table. Every rejection, every sideways glance, every assumption that someone like me would never amount to anything became fuel. I carried it like an ember, hidden but burning, pushing me forward when exhaustion nearly pulled me under. The world underestimated me at every turn, but in that underestimation, I found freedom. They never saw me coming, which meant I could climb higher, prepare longer, and strike harder. Being dismissed was never a weakness. It was the sharpest weapon I had. The drive back from the estate felt endless, city lights sliding across my windshield like silent witnesses. By the time I reached my building, the decision had already taken root. I dialed Rebecca, my chief of staff, her voice alert even at a late hour. I told her to cancel the merger, the deal worth $3 billion that had taken months of negotiation. She hesitated only long enough to remind me of the termination fee. $150 million would vanish in a single night. Corporate history is filled with failed mergers, each carrying massive penalties, sometimes hundreds of millions, and yet boards accept them as the cost of survival. What I chose was different. It was not a financial miscalculation, but a line in the sand. No partnership, no profit, no glittering balance sheet would be worth the price of my dignity. I would not attach my name to a man who believed my existence was a stain on his world. Rebecca's keyboard rattled as she executed the order. My voice, calm and steady, delivered the final instruction. Cite, fundamental incompatibility in management philosophy. It sounded clinical, but beneath the legal language was a truth that cut deeper than numbers. For years I had played the game, smiled through the arrogance, and nodded at the pretenses. But tonight was different. No more pretending. One insult at a dinner table had cost Victor Blackwood the one thing he could not afford to lose. Everything. Victor waited in the conference room, his shoulders sagging beneath an expensive suit that suddenly looked ill-fitted. When I entered, he stood, his words quick and polished, an apology wrapped in formality. Yet behind his eyes lingered the same disdain I had seen at the dinner table, as if the act of lowering himself to ask forgiveness was more painful than the insult he had thrown. He wanted the deal to proceed, but he did not want to see me as an equal. I let his apology sit in the air before cutting through it. I asked him to name one executive in his company who had grown up in public housing, one board member who had ever worked 3 jobs to afford community college, one senior leader who knew what it meant to stand in a free lunch line. He had no answer. The silence said everything. In corporate America, only 21% of Fortune 500 CEOs are first-generation college students, and his empire had done nothing to challenge that imbalance. This was not about one careless insult at a table lit by crystal and champagne. It was about a system that had locked people like me out for generations, convincing itself that pedigree was talent and inheritance was merit. His apology did not touch that truth. I leaned forward and told him plainly. The failure was not personal. It was structural, and his company was about to pay the price for it. By morning, the financial press had seized the story, and Blackwood Industries became the cautionary tale of the week. Their stock fell 20% in a single trading day, erasing more than $1.2 billion in market value. Shareholders flooded the board with calls, demanding answers, while analysts speculated how a company that once carried such weight could unravel so quickly. What they did not realize was that the collapse had started the moment Victor opened his mouth at that dinner table. Inside Blackwood's glass towers, panic spread faster than any press release. The board scheduled emergency meetings, desperate to stop the bleeding, but every option circled back to the same truth. The company had tied its survival to the merger I had just killed. They thought arrogance was a strategy, but arrogance was the poison. While they scrambled, I was already moving. My team reached out to Westridge Systems, Blackwood's fiercest competitor, to discuss opportunities that aligned with the values of innovation and mutual respect. The timing was deliberate, the strike precise. By the time Blackwood realized what was happening, the momentum had shifted. Power is not about shouting the loudest or sitting at the head of the table. Real power is forcing your opponent to stumble on their own pride, to make them bleed value while you stand steady. Victor thought he had silenced me with an insult, but in truth, he had handed me the weapon that would undo him. Jacob waited in my office long after his father had left the building. His eyes were red, not from defeat, but from a war inside him that had finally broken through. He told me he had grown up defending his father, explaining away the arrogance, hoping that one day Victor might soften. Watching the dinner unfold stripped away those illusions. For the first time, he admitted his shame, not only at his father's cruelty, but at his own silence. He knew what standing with me would cost. The Blackwood fortune stretched into hundreds of millions, secured in trusts and assets that could fund generations. Yet Jacob looked at it with clear eyes. 70% of inherited wealth disappears within 2 generations, he said, and now he understood why. Inheritance without honor was a hollow gift. It chained him to a legacy of arrogance rather than freeing him to build his own. Choosing me meant walking away from money, connections, and a name that once opened every door. But it also meant walking toward something stronger, something he could shape with his own hands. He said he wanted a life where love was not conditional, where respect did not have to be begged for, and where courage mattered more than cash. I listened as he spoke, my heart caught between fear and pride. When he took my hands, I realized the choice was not about loss at all. It was about creation. Honor is not passed down in wills or written in balance sheets. It is forged in the moments when you decide what kind of person you will be, even when the cost is everything you once thought you needed. Victor's empire did not crumble in silence. The boardroom that once echoed with his voice now carried only whispers of doubt. Within weeks, the directors voted to remove him as CEO, stripping away the authority he had wielded like a crown. The market delivered its own verdict. His personal wealth shrank by more than $500 million as shares tumbled and investors fled. The empire he believed unshakable was reduced to numbers bleeding red across financial screens. Aurora stepped in with precision, acquiring Blackwood Industries at a price 40% lower than the original deal. The contrast was brutal. What could have been a merger of equals became a takeover, born of necessity. Employees cheered the stability, shareholders breathed relief, and the industry learned a lesson that could not be ignored. Victor had measured worth by pedigree and privilege, but the future belonged to those who valued innovation and respect. When I addressed my team, I did not speak of revenge or victory. I spoke of principle. Respect is not a trophy handed out to those with old money. It cannot be bought at auction or inherited through a family name. Respect is earned through integrity, through the willingness to stand by values even when the cost is steep. Victor lost because he never understood that truth. His downfall was not written by me, but by his own arrogance. In the end, it was not my victory. It was justice. Victor's empire collapsed not because of a single decision, but because arrogance blinded him to what truly matters. He believed power came from wealth and a family name, yet both slipped through his fingers when integrity was absent. Olivia endured humiliation, carried the weight of her past, and stood unshaken. In the end, her resilience and dignity turned contempt into consequence. The lesson reaches far beyond a boardroom or a family feud. In work, in politics, and in the hardest corners of family life, money can be gained and lost. But honor is never negotiable. Integrity remains when balance sheets fade and titles are stripped away. That truth holds steady for anyone willing to live by it. If you have ever faced doubt or disrespect, let this story remind you that your worth is not defined by others. Stay with us for more stories of strength and honor in real-life struggles.